A lot of you running from the Hebrew. You let them on the internet scare you from the Lashawan Kodat. They say Lashawan Kodat, that ain't right. That ain't right.
But anyway, seeing that made me want to make a video on the group and on their use of the language, as there's a question that I've had in my mind that I've wanted to ask members of the group for a short while now. So here's the question I want to ask, and I'm serious about this question. How do you spell Yahanna, the name of the leader of the ISUPK, in Hebrew? I think this is an interesting question because I think while most Lashawan Kodash names transliterated into the Latin script, you can easily figure out what the Hebrew characters for that would be. This is a case where there's a lot of different possible spellings, especially since it's a name that's quite old within the history of Lashawan Kodash names. And also, I think there's some interesting potential historical notes that could be made. So that's the question that I want to ask. How do you spell Yahanna, which is to say the name of the leader of the ISUPK? How do you spell that name in Hebrew? What are the characters? So I'm going to go through a few possibilities, a few possible permutations. I'll render them both in the standard Hebrew script known as the Ashuri script, as well as in the ancient Phoenician script, which they also call the Paleo-Hebrew script. And I'm going to use the diacritical marks that were created by Arya, completely ahistorical, completely modern, but nonetheless, they're used by proponents of Lashawan Kodash. For those who aren't familiar with these little marks that you'll see under the Phoenician script, if it looks like a frown, that mark signifies simply an vocalization for the character it's underneath. However, if it looks like a smile, that connects two characters in which the second character is unvocalized. Proponents of Lashawan Kodash will be familiar with these diacritical marks. So, is Yahanna's name in Hebrew simply three syllables, Yahanna, and is it simply spelled Yod He Nun with the last character being vocalized? Is that how his name is spelled in Lashawan Kodash? Or is his name spelled Yod He Nun He, just with the final H not appearing, the final He not appearing at the end of transliterations? It's sort of just unwritten. Is that the case? Is it spelled with four letters? Or is it spelled with four letters, however, with the final letter being an aleph, Yahanna? Is that the spelling? Is that the way you spell Yahanna in Hebrew, in Lashawan Kodash? Yod He Nun Aleph? However, I'll concede that when I see the name Yahanna transliterated into the Latin script, it's usually transliterated with two N's. And so maybe that's not superfluous, maybe that's not a mistake, maybe that signifies that two Nuns appear in the name. So might it be spelled Yod He Nun Nun with the final Nun, the final N, being vocalized? Is that how his name is spelled? Admittedly, this spelling would be somewhat close to the historical spelling in Hebrew of the name John, not Jonathan, but rather the name John, Yohanan. However, it uses a he instead of a chet, and I think that's significant. But nonetheless, if you took out the wa, this would be fairly close, save for the he instead of the chet. Or might it be spelled Yod He Nun Nun Aleph, Yahanna, again with the first nun, the first N being silent. Is that how his name is spelled in Hebrew? In Lashawan Kodash? Is that how proponents of Lashawan Kodash, including Yahanna himself and his many followers, is that how they spell his name in Hebrew? Or was it spelled with a he instead? Yod He Nun Nun He. And again, with the first nun not being vocalized. Might that be the way that the name Yahanna is written in Lashawan Kodash? Or was the name simply based on his English name, John? For example, perhaps insisting that there's no J in Hebrew, maybe the J was quickly turned to a Y, and then insisting that there's no O in Hebrew, the O was quickly changed to an A, and then maybe they figured, hey, what the heck, why not just vocalize the other two characters as well? And by the way, for anyone who might be scandalized by the last character being vocalized, I realize that's not typical of proponents of Lashawan Kodash today, but it was apparently a part of the early stages of the development of Lashawan Kodash. For example, there are people who remember Bivens, quote-unquote Abba Bivens, using Shalama instead of Shalawam. And then, of course, there's also the name for Israel, Yasher Allah. That raises the question about why is it Yasher Allah and not Yasher Al? And of course, that comes up with a lot of other names that use the word El in them, like Nathaniel was rendered Nathanya Allah, Ariel was rendered Ariala, etc. So why is El rendered Allah instead of Al? And in fact, because it was unclear within Lashawan Kodash as to when the last character was vocalized and when it was not, that was precisely why Arya created these new diacritical marks for the Phoenician script, for the so-called Paleo-Hebrew script. It was precisely because he needed some sort of a marker for when to vocalize a character and when not, because it was somewhat arbitrary in his system, and that's ironic in itself. So in a nutshell, there are a few different possibilities, a few different permutations under the Lashawan Kodash system. There's a few different ways to render the name Yahanna, and that's why I want to ask, first and foremost, members of the ISUPK, perhaps even Yahanna himself, how do you spell that name? How do you spell the name Yahanna, which is to say the name of the leader of the ISUPK? How do you spell that name in Hebrew? And of course, people who are not with the ISUPK, but maybe were former members of One West or members of other One West splinter groups, I'm happy to hear the answer from them as well. So that's my main question. How do you spell Yahanna in Hebrew, in Lashawan Kodash?
You believe you just contradicting yourself.
I know the Hebrew matches up with that translation.
You know the Hebrew? Okay, let me test you if I know Hebrew. Let me test you if you know the Hebrew. How do you say I am who I am in Hebrew? How do you say I am who I am in Hebrew?
How you say I am who I am in Hebrew?
Yeah.
How you say?
You can't do the Hebrew. You can't do the prophet. No, I'm crazy.